Hi, this is Rich Girard, host of Girard at Large in the Morning, every Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 on AM 1250 WGAM. Welcome to this YouTube video that we were able to put together thanks to our partnership with Bill Wynn at GoffstownToday.com. We hope you enjoy what you're about to see. We're going to get right to it. Joining us now is Mike DeBlasi. He is the former school board member from Ward 3, and more importantly, he was chairman of the school board's Student Conduct Committee. And he accepted our invitation to be here this morning to discuss our ongoing expose of student violence issues in the city of Manchester and how they're handled not simply by the city of Manchester, but the state laws, the federal laws, the police procedures governing juveniles and all that hooey that gets in the way. And Mike has been a guest on our show before, and I really like having Mike as a guest because he, well, saying it in a diplomatic way, typically pulls no punches. Mike, we're really hoping to get some clarity on what happens at the Manchester School Board. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rich. You can't think of a better way to start the week, right?
Well, Mike, let me start with this proposition for you. You were chairman of the Student Conduct Committee. Since September, there have been nearly 150, from the beginning of September to the end of February, there were nearly 150 we'll call them acts of violence. Okay, there have been nearly 150 incidents, that's the word I was looking for, reported to the police, which, as you know from the Code of Conduct, means it's a level 4 offense. I mean, bells were going off in the building, this is bad stuff. If you were the Student Conduct Committee chairman, and in that period of time, there had been 150 incidents at the schools, how many meetings of the Student Conduct Committee would you think there would have been over that period of time?
Well, I can tell you this, that in the period from September through January, anyway, until my term on the board ended, we had one expulsion hearing.
Now, you chose the word expulsion hearing.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, there have, for all of these offenses, and in the time that you had one hearing, what is the purpose of the Student Conduct Committee if all it does is to meet for an expulsion?
Well, basically,
and should it be that way, Mike? Should it be that way?
It's a good question, Rich. And the Student Conduct Committee, perhaps it's not as well defined as some of the other committees on the school board, in part because all of the meetings of the Conduct Committee are generally held in non-public session. Basically, if you had to break it down, the purpose of the Conduct Committee is to review any policies and bring up for discussion any changes to policies involving student behavior. And then secondly, it's to listen to hearings of cases of students that are either facing expulsion or appealing, perhaps, an extended suspension.
Which can only be granted by the superintendent.
Yeah, the superintendent can grant a suspension of a student for 10 days and then also for a second 10-day period. So in essence, 20 school days of a student.
Now you see, Superintendent Brennan, who was here, said that he can suspend somebody without school board approval for the balance of the year so long as it is not an expulsion.
Well, that's certainly not a situation that happened while I was chairman of the Conduct Committee. Most of the situations were students who had been suspended for one 10-day period or perhaps a second 10-day period before they were brought to us.
So basically for expulsions and appeals of administrative is what this Conduct Committee...
Yeah.
So this committee receives zero data from the superintendent or the building principals about the offenses, the disciplinary issues that are taking place in the school.
The only information the members on that committee receive will be information in the student's personnel file of a student facing expulsion or already expelled and appealing that expulsion, looking to return to school.
Now, I've spoken at length on this issue with Deb Langdon, and which in and of itself I think is a credit to Deb because, as you know, I've been rather critical of her and some of the positions, or at least the way I think she's handled things as sort of inherently self-defeating prophecies or self-defeating approaches. But Deb and I have had an ongoing dialogue on this, and again, I think it's credit to her that she would pick up the phone and return the call of a critic to discuss an area where I think we have some agreement. She is incredibly frustrated, and I dare say incredulous at the idea that there have been nearly 150 documented offenses within the schools, and the Conduct Committee hasn't been called to meet once. But listening to you, and she's not a rookie to this committee. She was on it years ago, and now she's the chair. what I'm wondering is, you said that the conduct committee was supposed to review policies and things like that. How can the committee, very seriously, how can the committee know whether or not its policies are in fact proper? How can the committee know whether or not its policies are being implemented by the administration if there is no data coming to the committee from the administration about the disciplinary offenses that were committed, the resolutions that were imposed, to understand whether or not things are actually being acted on? Before you answer that, this is in light of a second letter that the school board has voted to send last week, reminding principals of their requirement to report various offenses to the police and therefore the superintendent, because they're not convinced that they're doing it.
Well, what you said right there touches on a big aspect of this, and that's like taking a whole lot on faith. Okay? Much of what was discussed or brought to the board's attention, certainly at the committee level, came from either dialogue from parents or teachers or administrators or people within the school. You have to assume, and you have to trust, that the administrators at each level, high school, middle school, that's where the vast majority of these cases are coming from. In fact, I don't recall meeting with an elementary school student facing expulsion during my time on the board. You have to trust that those principals are doing their job. They are reporting the cases that they should be, and the students who should be facing the severest disciplinary action are in fact brought to that conduct committee. The numbers don't bear that out, however, as you have pointed out on many occasions.
Am I wrong, Mike, to take a look at the situation? Now, for example, on the homepage of Girard at Large is an email I received from a parent. I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction. That email launched at Arthur Adamakis, the principal of Memorial. Now, I posted it, I sanitized it, I scrubbed it to hide, to protect the identity. But at Memorial, there was an assault. I found out about the assault from a listener who happens to be a mutual friend of mine and the girl's mother. Okay? I brought Lindsay Mason, the girl who was assaulted, on the show. And she wanted to come on the show at my invitation because she said stuff like this happens in the buildings all the time and nothing gets done. There are a lot of kids who go to school every day who are bullied and afraid to speak out, because when they speak out, it gets worse. And what happened after this girl spoke out, it got a whole lot worse. But she was, she knew it was coming. Okay? So one of the things that Arthur Adamakis did at Memorial was he hauled in the entire girls' varsity cheerleading squad and harangued them for the incident that took place where Lindsay got her nose broken and was given a concussion by the attacker, who was a junior varsity cheerleader. You see the connection here? So you have a junior varsity cheerleader commit an offense, and Arthur brings in the entire varsity squad and tells them that if they don't get their you-know-what together, that they're either going to be thrown off the team or their season's going to be canceled, as if they had some direct relation to the incident that happened. So a number of parents went to Arthur, who treated the mother's not so good according to the email, and the father, who showed up like a perfect gentleman. She came to me, this lady, and she had zero confidence, none at all, that the situation would be investigated by the school administration and properly dealt with. I forwarded it on to Tom Brennan, still waiting to hear back, won't confirm that there's an investigation. If there is one, won't confirm that there were results. People have no confidence that these issues, whether they involve abusive practices of the staff or student-on-student violence, are being dealt with at the schools. Should they feel that way?
Well, I can tell you this. As much as the board and anyone involved with education in Manchester has tried to preach uniformity, particularly among how each of our high schools are operated and how each of our middle schools are operated, the fact of the matter exists that each school has its own personality, and that personality stems from the leadership at the school. You can't expect that policies are 100% acted on consistently from school to school. Sometimes it's the nature of the environment, the nature of the students, the nature of the staff. I can't comment on what took place in the incident you're referring to, just because I'm not on the board anymore.
Right.
I can tell you with all honesty, Central, Memorial, West, those three schools operate quite differently from each other. Some of it is out of necessity and some of it is out of choice. But oftentimes it's not in line with the policies of the school district that the school board would like to see.
All right, we'll be back after the top of the hour. More with Mike DeBlasi. You won't believe what I just set him up to talk about. Stay tuned. Good morning, Manchester, and welcome to Hour 3 of Girard at Large. I am your host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. Our time is 8:05. Our station is AM 1250 WGAM. You can find us on the web at girardatlarge.com, and you can find us at Facebook and Twitter, also at Girard at Large. We continue now with Mike DeBlasi, former chairman of the Manchester School Board's Student Conduct Committee. Just before the top of the hour, I asked him about, what did I ask you about, Mike? We talked about the Arthur Adamakis thing and the fact that there are parents, teachers, people in the buildings who have zero confidence in the school administration or, frankly, school board's willingness, ability, or desire to tackle these issues. Which is why that parent of a Memorial High School cheerleader came to me after Arthur, the awful Adamakis, basically brickbatted a group of innocent teenage girls over an incident that, hey, listen, as I said at the time, if he's got information that says any one of those girls had any knowledge, participation in, whatever, he should bring them in as individuals and deal with them as individuals. This whole group punishment thing. But it goes to lack of confidence. So let me ask you some very specific questions. Correct me if I'm wrong. But from the interviews I've done with Superintendent Brennan and Sarah Ambrosi, who is currently a member of the Conduct Committee, and with conversations I've had with Deb Langton, who's the chair of that committee, number one, there is no policy requirement by the Board of School Committee that the principals at the building level report anything other than those level 4 offenses that get reported to the police, or anything that requires, in their mind, an extended suspension beyond their authority. Correct?
Yes, that's correct. Quite frankly, that's something that I would agree with in terms of the severity of an offense. I don't want principals sending reports of every disciplinary infraction.
I'm going to challenge you on that in just a minute, but I want to establish the ground rules and just make sure that the mic's ready for you. I want to establish the ground rules. So number one, there is no reporting requirement other than the ones we just went over.
That's true.
Number two, there is no reporting requirement by the on the superintendent to take anything that's brought to his attention at the building level and bring it to the school conduct committee, except if it involves an expulsion or an extended suspension that you say he can only go so far on, but he says he can go for an entire year. Balance of the school year. So there's nothing that would involve you necessarily as a school board member, correct?
Still right on.
Still right on. Now, you showed me the policy or the mandate on the conduct committee as written in the board's rules and what it's supposed to do. Would you care to read that for our listeners?
Sure, and this is pretty much what we said, policy 1.13, and its Committee on Student Conduct is assigned the following duties and responsibilities. A, review the progress of programs and activities that relate to student conduct and recommend policies for the alternate education programs. B, review and recommend policies relating to the Student Code of Conduct. And C, hear and make decisions on student expulsion cases and appeals of long-term suspensions.
So absent the expulsion part of it, Mike, how can that committee do the first two items on its mandate, if it's not being provided any data by the administration on what's actually happening?
Well, it certainly makes it a little bit more difficult.
How do you hold your building administrators accountable for whether or not their school is being run in conformance with the policies of the district?
And that goes back to what we said earlier. You put a lot of trust in your administrators, and you have a lot of faith that they're going to do what they're supposed to do.
Now let's get to that, because one of the things that set me off in a way that has not set me off on a whole lot of issues was at this school board meeting. In this discussion over student violence, the superintendent said three things that blew me away. Number one, he said, we don't know how many of these offenses, of the 141, I think was the exact number being tossed around, are committed by the same person. So in other words, it's not necessarily 141 different people committing acts of violence. It could only be 50 or 60 of them, with some of them creating multiple offenses. Number one, Do you believe that they don't know?
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say that perhaps at the moment he didn't know because he didn't have the data in front of him, but you should know. You should absolutely know based on the student's name and disciplinary history.
He has maintained consistently, even in an interview in that chair where you are right now, that he does not know that information.
Should know that information.
He should know that information. I'll bet the people at the building level know that information, and I know the police know the information, because you know what? I got a phone call from a police officer who works in juvenile after we went over some of these statistics on the air. I said, Rich, I need to tell you what's going on at McDonough. Sorry, McLaughlin.
If a student is disciplined, it should go on that student's record, and you should be able to look back as far as you want.
So is the superintendent out of touch with what's going on, or is he not telling the truth?
I can't put words into his mouth. I can tell you that there has always been a wall, if you will, certainly from my time on the board, between administration knowledge and board knowledge, and there's information that just doesn't get over the wall.
Should that wall exist?
In most cases, I would say no. I think you need to have transparency, and you need to have the free-flowing information between administration and elected officials that are representing their constituents.
Second thing that blew me away, he said, we don't know how many of these incidents involve special ed kids.
The HIPAA laws and what we have to face with students who are on an IEP are quite challenging sometimes, and they can be frustrating.
But they do know.
I would like to.
You know how I know they know? Because when I get that phone call from a police officer who works at the juvenile division saying, here's what's happening at McLaughlin, he told me that 16 of the 24 assaults at that school were caused by 5 kids who were part of the special ed program.
And I can tell you right now.
But they couldn't really classify it as an assault because it was, quote, a manifestation of their disability, end quote.
Okay, and to let people know what that means, and you touched on
it means they
before.
can't help themselves, and therefore they must be excused.
Well,
may not be punished.
I'm going to put at it from the former chair there. There were many students who were involved in problems, okay? They broke the rules of conduct. They were facing some type of disciplinary action. Yet, in the end, they never appeared before the Student Conduct Committee. They never faced expulsion. And the reason for that was quite simply their IEP and the evaluation afterwards proved that manifestation of disability.
That's fine. Let's take that at face value. Should a kid who does that over and over again, let's just put it the way it is. The system says he can't help himself. It's a manifestation of his disability. Does he belong in a classroom where he's assaulting his peers and his teachers and their aides? Should that kid be somewhere other than a classroom, disrupting the educational opportunity and the safety of all involved?
Absolutely. Here's the problem. Those decisions are not made at the board level in Manchester or at the state level in New Hampshire. Those ties that bind us come from far beyond our borders.
Okay, so you're saying legally they have to be. I'm asking morally and ethically whether or not they should be.
Well,
because I have a congressman who has said, if Manchester will give me the data on what's happening in the classrooms, I will change the law in Washington. And that was Charlie Bass, and we got him on the record to do it.
If Congressman Bass is powerful enough to do that, then
I believe Charlie will go work for it. But here's the deal: how can he go fight the battle if he doesn't have the data, which the district says it doesn't have? We've got Jason on the line in Manchester who would like to comment, and we'll take his call, and then we'll get to the thing that really hacked me off with Superintendent Brennan. Jason, thanks for being out there, and thanks for your call.
Hey, Rich, thanks a lot. Great interview. I'm learning a lot here.
Jason Cooper, is it not, from Ward 11?
That's right.
All right. Well, sorry if I added you, man, but
no, that's okay.
Jason,
I just wanted to talk briefly about the data that you're talking about, and you're absolutely right. What you get out of it is what you put into it. That the assaults and all the different discipline that was reported on that spreadsheet there, the police described to us that is everything that happens at that address, so the school address. So, for example, if there's an arrest for drugs on the sidewalk next to Central, that's recorded in that data. So the data that's reported
Jason,
really...
Let me just cut you off there for a minute. I heard that, and I'm sympathetic to that, but in my own discussions with Lieutenant Legassi, who's the chief, who's in charge of the juvenile division, I'm pretty convinced that those numbers are solid in terms of students doing things on school grounds during school hours. There might be a couple of infractions, but it's statistically insignificant. So, to be perfectly honest with you, bud, I wouldn't hang my hat on that.
No, and you're absolutely right. And my issue is that I think the data could be even better if the reporting system was developed more, and that's a frustration at our level at least, because I hear stories from all the different schools, from West, Parkside, Memorial, and it seems to be a lot higher than what's being reported to us, and it is very frustrating. So anyways, that's all I wanted to say to you. Thanks a lot. I'm going to listen offline.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to be sounding off on that one in just a minute. Continuing now with Mike DeBlasi. I get Mike's, and I got Mike DeBlasi, and I got Mike Ball, and I got Mike's everywhere. I got to be careful. So, and thanks to Committeeman Cooper for calling in. Here's the thing that the superintendent said, Mike, that as a former elected official and as somebody who was a long-time staff aide to an elected official, set what was left of my hair on fire and caused me to lose what's left of my mind. And that is, at the same time he's claiming he doesn't know how many are repeat offenders, he doesn't know how many are special ed infractors or offenders, whatever you want to call it. He said, I will not pass along the names of students to the school board, students involved in these infractions. I will not. It's not, the law doesn't let me, as I'd like to, but he was pretty emphatic about it. I will not pass along the names of student offenders to the school board. Mike, the arrogance of that statement for an appointed official who is subservient to that board absolutely infuriated and still infuriates me. If you were sitting on that board right now and you heard your superintendent of schools actively refuse to provide you with information that might allow you to fulfill your mandate, might allow you to get a handle on what was happening in your buildings, so that you could go forward to people like Charlie Bass or the state or anybody else and say, look, obviously you're not going to release the names of the offenders, you're a quasi-judicial board at that point, you are obligated by law to maintain the confidentiality of the students, which is a whole nother discussion, okay? If you're sitting there and you have your superintendent of schools openly refusing to send you information that might better enable you to understand what was happening and do your job, what would you do?
Well, I would be furious if the information that was being withheld could be provided to us without any legal ramifications. There have been instances, there were instances when I was on the board where committee members grew increasingly frustrated in cases where information was not provided. And it wasn't just relegated to students. It involved staff, it involved personnel decisions. It seriously hampered the board's ability
Did you
to do the right thing.
ever challenge him and force him to produce the legal mandates he says he was operating under? Because I did, and I get a response to which I am still waiting for a response from my follow-up. I mean, really, the school board as a governing body is not allowed to know personnel information, is not allowed to know. You act in confidence.
I can tell you what happened on more than one occasion was that legal counsel would come in there and make a recommendation that the board be kept in the dark in these matters in case there was a subsequent appeal, that they did not want to prejudice any of the information or any of the board or leave members open to a different kind of scrutiny. That wasn't what most of us wanted to hear.
But even if that were the legal advice,
And by the way, I'm sure we could have gotten legal advice to the contrary as well, but that was the legal advice that was presented to us.
Mike, it seems to me that the system here is set up to provide maximum obscurity at every level.
There's not a lot of transparency.
So getting back to a point I said I was going to challenge you on, why not, if you really don't know whether or not your policies, if you have to take it on faith, to use your words, if you really don't know whether or not your policies are being dealt with, why not require the building principals to send a report of every disciplinary infraction to the superintendent? I'm not saying it has to be a forever thing, but here's the deal. Tell me if this ladder of accountability and transparency that I think should be built is off track. Number one, we really don't know what's happening in the buildings. There's enough anecdotal evidence that I'm getting from parents, teachers, students, people, Mike, that, given my political affiliation, you don't think would be supportive of me in anything, stopping me at restaurants and saying, we're following you, thank you. Stuff is happening at the bill. I've had 3-hour meetings with people sitting right there in that chair where you are, who have come to me quite on their own to say, I need to tell you what's happening at such and such a school. My challenge is how to get that information out there without compromising your confidence. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
So why not have every, from a cut slip to a kid who cut the guy next to him, why not have everything sent with the name of the student to the superintendent on a regular basis, so that we start to get a picture of what not only is happening in the school, but how that administrator chose to deal with it. When I have a mom sitting at a public hearing in front of the school board, begging the school board to overturn her daughter's 5-day external suspension and 30-day prohibition against participating in any curricular activity because she got caught with ibuprofen. But the reports that we're getting, which can't be confirmed, is that the girl who broke Lindsay Mason's face got 5 days external. She's still on the cheerleading team. As far as we know, she is. You've got all of this crazy stuff happening. We get 5 days external plus 30 days suspension for ibuprofen. Do you want to get in between a teenage girl and her ibuprofen? I don't think so. But so so why not take a look at what's happening and what the administrators are doing to handle it? So you can start to see what's happening on a micro level at the buildings. So the superintendent can start to take a look and say, well, gee, there's something weird going on here at Hallsville, or there's something good going on here at Webster. And start to see how the different buildings are operating. And why not send that data for review to the Student Conduct Committee so it can do the job that its policies say it's supposed to do. And have all of the, you want to know if you've got repeat offenders, you want to know if they're special ed kids, fine. Send along the names. And then, why not sanitize the report, categorize the offenses by school, and put it on the school department's website, so that every parent in the district can go and take a look and see what's happening in their building, and have final public accountability to the people who have got their kids in the buildings and who are paying the taxes to make it happen. Where am I wrong with this?
Well, I certainly wouldn't minimize the significance of school safety. It should be a top priority. If you can't be comfortable and without fear in a learning environment, then how can you be expected to learn? And that is paramount importance. I have, however, a 3-page document of the rules of conduct here, everything from a level 1, including chewing gum in class, right up through a level 4, possession of a weapon or offense. To micromanage and
not to micromanage, to review, to review and see what's happening and what they're doing.
Think that it's feasible, however, for a staff at a school, for an administration that handles 16,000 students, to provide daily updates of every single offense, no matter how insignificant they are. Wearing a baseball hat in a classroom. I'm sorry, I don't need to know how many 300 students wore a baseball cap on Monday and Tuesday and so forth.
My father, who retired from the system in 2001, looked at me with utter amazement when I told him that there were no requirements. He's like, I know it was a while ago, he said, but I seem to remember that we had just finished a computer system that would allow us to do just that. So that every infraction that happened was being put into the computer system and automatically going to be cataloged, whatever it is, so that everyone could take a look at the data. Now, my dad retired in January of 2001, so that was a while ago.
I wouldn't be surprised,
and he's
Rich.
a little hazy on that.
The same computers are still in the schools from 2001.
Okay, well then the system's in place. So if the system's geared up, I mean, Mike, how are we supposed to, you know what though? There was someone said, oh yeah, well, the teachers have got bigger hills to die on than whether or not kids are wearing baseball caps or following the dress code. I disagree, and I'll tell you why I disagree. Because if they can get away with something here, they're always going to try to get away with the other thing. When Rudy Giuliani went to New York City as mayor, he didn't crack down. He didn't have a crackdown on burglars. He didn't have a crackdown on murderers. He didn't have a crackdown on rapists. He had a crackdown on the squeegee guys. He had a crackdown on the hookers. He had a crackdown on those small quality of life things that people said, oh, there are bigger hills to die on. And lo and behold, he showed that when you alter the environment by taking care of those so-called minor offenses, you affect the macro picture. Why, if it can work in New York City, where fully half of the decrease in crime nationwide was attributed to what he did in New York City and what Mayor Reardon did in Los Angeles, pretty much the same thing. Why would we not take that approach at the school level? Why wouldn't we want to know if we've got a principal in one school that's doing a good job enforcing the dress code for both teachers and students? We got one over there that's not. Why wouldn't we want to do that?
I gotta say, there's a difference between a kid wearing a ball cap in high school and a prostitute on a New York City street corner.
It's all environmental, Mike. It's what you can get away with.
I don't disagree that you need to clean up your surroundings. You need to put a good face out there because perception is so much stronger than reality in times. However, the most important thing here is trying to educate these kids as effectively as possible. All I'm saying to your concern is that a policy that describes, that details, that categorizes the most serious of offenses, yes, absolutely. That data should be readily available for any board member, for any administrator or educator in the city. But there's a point where you need to draw the line and say, okay, below this, we don't have time, we don't have the resources to go after that. And one other thing.
If the system's already in place, if my dad's memory is correct, you already have the system in place to do it.
The technology throughout the district, particularly what's involved in some of the schools, to call it outdated would be doing a disservice because it's almost useless in many cases if it even exists.
Mike DeBlasi, thank you for joining us here this morning on Girard at Large. This was, I thought, a great discussion of the issue. We appreciate your participation. We are going now to our Candy Trailers traffic report.